and I heard there were programming jobs in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. I'm moving there. And so my parents, we have family out in California, and I knew they were traveling out there. So I was like, hey, can you just drop me off in California? And so that's what they did. I packed up the few things I had one box and my bicycle, and I rode with them out to California. They dropped me off in the Mission in San Francisco, and my mom was like completely freaking out. She's like, yeah, so I told them, so I decided I was doing this, and I told my parents, hey, can you do this? And they're like, well, do you have a job out there? I'm like, nope. But I did get one before I moved out. I was able, I think actually because of the startup I tried to do, it wasn't too hard for me to get like my first full-time salary position, because people would look at me like, wow, this person clearly knows what they're doing. I think that's really what happened. And so I did get a job in San Francisco before I moved out there, but after I decided I was doing it and after I had made arrangements to move out there. But I just remember my mom dropping me off in the Mission, and my family is weird about cities. They think all cities are like the most dangerous thing ever. And anyways, my mom is just like dropping me off, and she's like, are you sure this job is real? Like, what? Are you sure about this? You don't want us to like stay around? And I'm like, no, I got this. It's all good. So yeah, then we start the actual 9-to-5 journey, this thing that I've been dreading this whole time, but it seemed like I had no other option. And I was definitely losing hope at this point. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to do this. It seems impossible, but I don't know. I have no other options. I have no money. I have to pay this money. It felt like I was forced into it. And so I started this job. It was for a small software as a service company. And it was a startup. I think we had like 15 people or something. I was one of, 7 or 8 programmers. And I immediately continued my pattern. I really like to work at night when nobody else was there. So I would often go into the office at like 9 p.m., take BART in, take the metro in, and I had this like scooter. This was before the electric scooters. It's just a foot-powered scooter, and I'd ride that, and I would ride that around the office. I would turn on music or a movie, and I'd program all night long and always the next day. So basically maybe 20 hours straight, 24 hours straight. And I, just, more of the same of working hard, and I'd probably burn myself out after a while. And this is when I call it sort of my Star Trek phase, because I would work really hard. I did a lot of programming. They were really happy with me. But then I would watch Star Trek at work for 3 weeks straight. I would go back to working 9 to 5, show up, and I'd put Star Trek on in the corner of my screen and not program, not do anything. I'd answer emails to make it seem like I was working. But I was too depressed. I didn't know this at the time again. I just felt horrible. It's like, why can't I do all this stuff again, blaming myself. And I would just watch Star Trek for weeks at a time at work. That's all I could do. I couldn't do the work. And I think some people might be like, well, that's like stealing and you can't do that. Like, that's not right. But I didn't know of any other option. To me, this seemed like what I had to do. I needed the paycheck. I had to pay bills. I had to survive. I needed food, right? So I would go and feel horrible sitting there trying to pretend like I was working, but I was really watching Star Trek. And I would go home and watch Star Trek. That's all I did for those few weeks or whatever, how long that period was. And then I'd feel better and I'd go back to working really hard. Anyways, you can see how this pattern goes, but I drank lots of Mountain Dew. Yeah. And, this This is how it went. And it's also when I started to learn that not everyone is necessarily the same. So it's when I met my current partner, and she pretty quickly was like, your behavior is not what I would say is like normal, or like, I don't know if she would say normal, but like, she's like, I don't think other people feel exactly the same as you. I think you're imagining this. And I was like, no way. Everyone feels exactly the same as me. They're just more capable. They just have better willpower. And eventually I was like, okay, fine. Maybe you're right. And this is when I actually started talking to like my doctor and stuff. And when I ended up going to the psychiatrist and telling them basically my story, a lot of what I told you here. And they're like, well, this is like classic type 2 bipolar disorder. And boy, that was so strange, that feeling. I'm like, what do you mean? Like it to me felt impossible. I just had ingrained it in me that everyone else feels the same way I do. Everyone else experiences the same thing. So it's like, does everyone have type 2 bipolar disorder? You know? Yeah. So that was, I was about 22, I think. And I had that diagnosis, and I was prescribed some medication. And this is where it gets, I think, really interesting, especially as it relates to work in the software industry and everything. So this job I had at the time, I was still working at the startup. In hindsight, they were really great for me. They were really flexible. Nobody ever complained about my weird work habits, other than one time. I remember, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was so excited about my code. I was coding so fast. I wrote really terrible code. Like all the variables were one letter, and it made sense to me at the time in my head. I don't know where, maybe this was part of the hypomania with the bipolar. Like it all made sense and it all worked, but somebody else saw this code and, oh yeah, this company we had no code review process. You just wrote code and pushed it live. There was almost no testing really. You just wrote code, pushed it live, right? And so for the most part, nobody ever looked at your code, especially if it was like your area. Like everyone had their area, you worked on your area. And so I would say in general, I wrote good quality code, but sometimes I wrote code like this when I was probably in a hypomanic state. And somebody one time saw it, and my boss and actually the CEO, who also did a lot of programming, was like, yo, dude, this ain't cool. You can't do this. So it's kind of like being on probation a little bit again. But I quickly, did better and it was fine. And in hindsight, I was like, wow, they were really nice. They were really flexible. They had this sort of, they called it unlimited combined vacation sick policy. And I would take 5 to 6 weeks off a year, which I absolutely needed. I needed more, to be honest, to fit this pattern. But I didn't feel right taking more. Technically, maybe I could have, but it's one of those things where you don't want to be too far outside the bounds of normal, right? And so if nobody else has taken 3 weeks off a year, you're not going to take 3 months off a year. You're not going to take 3 months off a year too, right? So yeah, they were super flexible, and nobody really ever complained or said anything about my strange work habits. I don't know. They were definitely, like, I don't really have anything but good stuff to say about how they were in relation to my mental health. I think they could maybe, if they saw what was going on, they could have actually helped me more, but I don't necessarily expect them to have, like if they were like, oh, hey, do you need some more time off, or do you need a different work environment? Like that's another part of it. This was an open office work environment, and I couldn't do any work when everyone was in the office. It felt like I was being watched. I couldn't do any work. So yeah, that was extremely, extremely hard. So probably also why I would do most of my work at night when nobody was there. And they never, I would have thought they would have picked up on some of this. They never said anything. Maybe they never noticed. Maybe I was good at hiding it. I don't know. So I'm not really going to blame them for anything. But there's definitely more I'm going to say about it. Wasn't all like this at all my other jobs. It was much, much more difficult at some. But anyways, back to the diagnosis. So I got diagnosed and prescribed some medication. And this was really interesting. So the medication I was prescribed, it seemed like what it did was basically flatline me. That's how I describe it. So I still sometimes got depressed, sometimes still got maybe a little bit hypomanic, but for the most part, it just made me real constant. And I was actually more able to do a 9-to-5 and do regular work. I would go in and work like regular people. Well, at least how it seemed like regular people worked. And this worked for a while. It feels in my head when I think about that time, it doesn't feel great. It feels like it dulled all of my emotions. And so I was used to having these really high highs, getting that program to work, making really awesome things in software or doing really hiking 30 miles and just doing awesome outdoor things and just having these feelings of super exhilaration, these super high highs. That was gone, and it felt like part of me was gone too. It was just, I don't know, I felt all the time I was sort of like, yeah, whatever. I felt like I didn't have a lot of emotion in general, but I was able to survive. It let me survive. And if I didn't have this, I don't know where I would have been, but not here, not now, not doing this. I would not have survived in any sense that I know of. Like, I was basically at the end of my rope at this point. So it enabled me to survive. I think I had to give up kind of my personality, which sucked. But apparently it was a drug that makes it so you can be a part of the capitalist machinery and go in and earn a company money every day from 9 to 5, just like everyone else. And so I appreciate it in a sense. And I'm kind of talking about it negatively, but it's more just because that was the feeling it created inside of me. But the reality is it was a big deal in a positive way because it gave me space to start to deal with things. I was still really stressed about money because I had so much student loan debt. But it wasn't enough. So it helped me do this 9 to 5 for longer. Basically, I think it gave me another year or two. But eventually I burned myself out and I quit that job. And I was like, I'm starting another company. I'm doing another startup.